London, 1845. Grace Montgomery stared at the letter in her trembling hands, the carefully pennied words blurring as tears threatened to spill onto the expensive parchment. Her beloved Edward was gone. 3 months at sea, and his ship had vanished without a trace off the coast of Portugal. The letter from his shipping company expressed their deepest condolences for her loss, but the words felt hollow, mechanical, as if Edward had been merely a ledger entry rather than the man who had captured her heart. Miss Montgomery, the timid voice of her lady's maid, pulled Grace from her grief. "The carriage is ready. Your aunt is waiting." Grace folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her reticule. "Thank you, Mary. I shall be down directly." The looking-glass reflected a pale face framed by auburn curls that had lost their luster. At 25, Grace had believed her future secure, even if it had meant waiting for Edward to establish himself before they could marry. Now that future had crumbled like sand through her fingers. Love, Grace had learned, was a luxury afforded to few, and even when found, could be cruelly snatched away by fate's capricious hand. She smoothed her black mourning dress, straightened her shoulders, and prepared to face London society once more. Her aunt, Lady Windermere, had insisted she leave the small village where she'd grown up and come to London, ostensibly to distract her from her grief, but Grace knew better. At her age, with modest means and a father who had gambled away most of the family fortune before his death, Grace needed to secure her future. A governess position, perhaps, or a lady's companion. Her brief brush with love had been a beautiful dream, but dreams did not pay for food or shelter. As the carriage rumbled through London's busy streets toward her aunt's townhouse in Mayfair, Grace watched the world pass by with detached interest. Her heart belonged to Edward, even if he now resided only in her memories. She would never love again, of that she was certain. "There you are, my dear," Aunt Windermere said as Grace entered the drawing-room. "I was beginning to worry you might be indisposed." "Forgive me, Aunt. I was reading a letter." Her aunt's face softened with momentary sympathy before resuming its usual expression of determined cheerfulness. "Well, you are here now, and just in time. We've been invited to Lady Kensington's ball tomorrow evening." Grace's stomach clenched. "Aunt, I'm still in mourning." "For a man who was not your husband, nor even your official fiancé," her aunt reminded her gently but firmly. "Society will not recognize your grief as they would a widow's. Besides, it has been 3 months since the news arrived. Light mourning is quite acceptable now." "I cannot dance," Grace protested. "No one expects you to, my dear." "But you cannot hide away forever. You need connections if you are to find a suitable position." Lady Windermere's voice softened. "Edward would not want you to fade away in solitude." Grace knew her aunt was right, even as her heart rebelled against the idea. "Very well, Aunt. I shall attend, but I will wear grey, not a bright colour." "Perfectly acceptable. And who knows, perhaps Lady Kensington's ball will be the first step toward your new beginning." Grace merely nodded, unable to imagine any beginning that did not include Edward. The Kensington ballroom blazed with candlelight that reflected off gilded mirrors and the jewels adorning London's elite. Grace felt decidedly out of place in her simple grey silk gown, modest in both cut and embellishment. Her only ornament was a small pearl pendant that Edward had given her before his final voyage. "Miss Montgomery, may I present the Duke of Harrington?" Lady Windermere's voice cut through Grace's reverie. Grace curtsied automatically, her gaze lifting to meet the eyes of the gentleman before her. The Duke was taller than average, with broad shoulders tapering to a trim waist. His dark hair was neatly styled, with one rebellious lock falling across his forehead. But it was his eyes that captured her attention, intense grey blue, studying her with an interest that seemed far too personal for a first meeting. "Miss Montgomery, it is a pleasure," he said, his voice deep and melodious. "Your aunt has spoken highly of you." "You are too kind, Your Grace," Grace replied, the words emerging through sheer force of proper upbringing. "I fear my aunt's affection leads her to exaggerate my qualities." A smile tugged at one corner of his mouth. "I doubt that very much. Lady Windermere is known for her discerning judgment." "Nicholas, do stop monopolizing my niece," Lady Windermere chided, though her eyes sparkled with obvious approval. "There are others waiting to meet her." The Duke bowed slightly. I shall relinquish her for now, but I hope Miss Montgomery will save me a place on her card for conversation later." As he moved away, Grace released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "You seem quite familiar with the Duke, Aunt." "Nicholas Kincaid has been a friend of the family for many years. His father and your uncle were at Cambridge together. A fine young man, though perhaps a bit too serious for his age. He inherited the dukedom quite young, you see, after his father and older brother died in a hunting accident." Grace felt a pang of sympathy. How tragic. Indeed, he was barely 20. Now at 30, he manages his estates admirably and is considered quite a catch. Lady Windermere's meaningful glance was not lost on Grace. "Aunt, please, I am not here to catch a husband, much less a duke. I am here to make connections for a position." "One can do both, my dear," her aunt replied with a knowing smile before ushering her toward another group of guests. The evening progressed in a blur of introductions and polite conversation. Grace spoke with several matrons who might be in need of a governess or companion, maintaining a pleasant demeanor despite the barely disguised pity in their eyes. Poor Miss Montgomery, their expressions seemed to say, reduced to seeking employment after her merchant suitor's unfortunate demise. She was grateful for a moment's respite when she found herself near an open terrace door. The cool night air beckoned, offering escape from the stifling heat of too many bodies in too grand a room. Seeking fresh air, Miss Montgomery, the Duke of Harrington appeared at her side, startling her. "Your Grace, yes, it is rather warm. Would you permit me to accompany you?" "Just to the edge of the terrace, where we remain in full view of the ballroom." Propriety satisfied, Grace nodded. "Thank you." They stepped onto the stone terrace, the sounds of the ball muting slightly as they moved away from the doorway. The night air was cool but not unpleasant, carrying the scent of Lady Kensington's famous rose garden below. "I understand you recently arrived in London," the Duke said. "Yes, just a fortnight ago. My aunt was kind enough to invite me to stay." "And before that, you lived in Devonshire, I believe." Grace glanced at him, surprised by his knowledge. "Yes, in a small village called Thornfield." "Lovely country. I have an estate not far from there." A brief silence fell between them, not entirely uncomfortable. The Duke seemed content to stand beside her, gazing out at the gardens below. "Your aunt mentioned your recent loss," he said finally, his voice gentle. "Please accept my condolences." Grace stiffened. "Thank you, Your Grace, it is still difficult to speak of." "Of course, forgive my intrusion," he paused. "I merely wished you to know that I understand something of what it is to have one's expected future suddenly altered." The simple statement, devoid of pity, touched her unexpectedly. "Yes, I suppose you would." "May I ask what your plans are now, Miss Montgomery?" "I am seeking a position as a governess or lady's companion," Grace replied, lifting her chin slightly. "My education is quite good, and I have some skill with music and languages." The Duke frowned slightly. "I see, and is this what you wish for yourself?" The question caught her off guard. No one, not even her aunt, had asked what she wanted. "It is what is necessary, Your Grace. I have limited means, and must support myself." "There are other options, surely." "For a woman of modest fortune and connections," Grace gave a small, bitter laugh, "the options are rather limited, I'm afraid. Marriage or employment are the only respectable choices, and She stopped abruptly, realizing she had nearly confessed her determination never to marry. "You have decided against marriage," he finished for her, his expression unreadable. Grace felt her cheeks warm. "It is not a path I currently consider." "Because your heart belongs to the man you lost." The directness of his statement was shocking, yet oddly comforting. "Yes," she admitted quietly. "It does." The Duke nodded, as if her confirmation had settled something in his mind. "We should return to the ballroom before your absence is noted," he said, offering his arm. Grace took it, feeling the solid strength beneath the fine wool of his evening coat. For a brief moment, she felt anchored, safe, a dangerous feeling she quickly dismissed. As they re-entered the ballroom, Lady Kensington approached, her face alight with curiosity. "Duke, I see you've become acquainted with Miss Montgomery. How delightful." "Indeed, Lady Kensington." Miss Montgomery is a refreshing addition to London society. You must join us for dinner next week, both of you, Lady Kensington said, looking pointedly at Lady Windermere, who had appeared at Grace's side. A small gathering, very select. We would be honoured, Lady Windermere replied before Grace could formulate an excuse. The Duke bowed. Until then, ladies. As he walked away, Grace felt Lady Kensington's speculative gaze upon her. My dear, the older woman said, you have made quite an impression on the Duke. He rarely spends so much time with new acquaintances. I'm sure His Grace was merely being polite, Grace replied, discomfort growing as she noticed several other guests watching them with interest. The Duke of Harrington is never merely anything, my dear. When he shows interest, it is genuine. Lady Kensington patted her arm. And most welcome, I'm sure. The remainder of the evening passed slowly, with Grace increasingly aware of the speculative glances and whispers that followed her. By the time their carriage arrived, she was exhausted from maintaining a pleasant facade. Well, Lady Windermere said as they settled into the carriage, that was most interesting. Aunt, please tell me you did not arrange an introduction to the Duke with any expectations. Arrange? My dear, Nicholas asked specifically to meet you. He saw you enter the ballroom and inquired immediately about the lovely young woman in grey. Grace's head spun with this revelation. But why? He cannot possibly. That is, I am hardly the sort of woman a duke would. Nicholas has always had unconventional tastes, and he is long overdue to choose a duchess. Aunt, Grace said firmly, I have no intention of becoming anyone's duchess or wife of any kind. My heart is not available. Lady Windermere's expression softened. My dear girl, I understand your grief. Edward was a fine young man, but he would want you to find happiness again. It is not simply grief, Aunt. I cannot give what I do not possess. My heart is gone, buried at sea with Edward. Perhaps it is merely wounded and needs time to heal. Lady Windermere reached across to pat her hand. Time has a way of changing our most firmly held convictions. Grace said nothing, turning to gaze out the carriage window at the dark London streets. The Duke's face appeared in her mind, those intent eyes that seemed to see past her carefully constructed facade. She dismissed the image. No matter how charming or handsome the Duke of Harrington might be, her heart remained with Edward, forever beyond reach. The next morning brought a delivery of flowers, not the expected roses or lilies, but a tasteful arrangement of forget-me-nots and snowdrops. The card simply read, To New Beginnings, Harrington. How lovely, Lady Windermere remarked, admiring the arrangement. Snowdrops represent hope, you know. Grace touched the delicate white blooms. And forget-me-nots speak of true love and remembrance. An interesting choice, her aunt observed. One might almost think the Duke understands your situation more deeply than expected. Before Grace could respond, the butler announced another delivery, an invitation to a small musical evening at the Duke's London residence 2 days hence. We shall attend, of course, Lady Windermere declared. Aunt, I cannot encourage him, it would be unfair. My dear, it is a musical evening, not a proposal. Besides, the Duke of Harrington is not a man easily discouraged, nor is he likely to misinterpret simple courtesy as encouragement. Grace had her doubts, but acquiesced to her aunt's wishes. The Duke was being kind, nothing more. Once he understood she was determined to remain unattached, his interest would surely fade. The Duke's townhouse in Grosvenor Square was magnificent without being ostentatious. Classical proportions and elegant furnishings spoke of refined taste rather than showy wealth. The musical salon was intimate, with seating for perhaps 30 guests around a magnificent grand piano. Miss Montgomery, Lady Windermere. The Duke greeted them himself, rather than leaving the task to his butler. I am delighted you could attend. The pleasure is ours, Your Grace, Lady Windermere replied. What a lovely home you have. Thank you, it suits my purposes when Parliament is in session, though I prefer my country estate most of the year. His gaze settled on Grace. I hope you enjoy music, Miss Montgomery. Very much, Your Grace. I play the pianoforte, though not with any great skill. Modesty becomes you, but I suspect you underestimate your abilities. Perhaps someday you might favor us with a performance. Before Grace could demur, they were joined by an elegant older woman with the Duke's striking grey-blue eyes. "Mother, may I present Miss Grace Montgomery and her aunt, Lady Windermere." "Ladies, my mother, the Dowager Duchess of Harrington." The Dowager Duchess assessed Grace with a keen gaze that missed nothing. "Miss Montgomery, I have heard much about you." Grace curtsied. "Your Grace, I fear there is little to tell. On the contrary, my son speaks quite highly of your refreshing candor." A hint of a smile softened the Duchess's aristocratic features. "A rare quality in London society." "Mother exaggerates," the Duke said, though his expression suggested otherwise. "Miss Montgomery, I have seated you near the piano as I recall your fondness for music. If you'll allow me." He offered his arm, leading Grace to a small grouping of chairs near the performance area. The seat offered an excellent view of the pianist's hands while remaining slightly separate from the main assembly. "Thank you, Your Grace." "This is perfect. I hoped you would approve." He hesitated, then added, "I find these gatherings can be overwhelming at times. Here, you may observe without being constantly observed yourself." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her. He had somehow sensed her discomfort with being the center of attention. "You are very perceptive, Your Grace." "Nicholas, please, at least in private conversation." "I could not presume." "It is not presumption when permission is freely given." His eyes held hers for a moment longer than was strictly proper. "We are friends, are we not, Grace?" The use of her given name sent an unexpected shiver through her. "I hardly know you, Your Grace." "A situation I hope to remedy, but I shall not press you further tonight. Please enjoy the music." As he moved away to greet other guests, Grace felt oddly bereft. The Duke, Nicholas, was unlike any man she had met before, direct yet considerate, authoritative yet gentle. Edward had been passionate and impulsive, quick to laugh and quick to dream. Nicholas Kincaid was something altogether different, steady, thoughtful, with depth she sensed but could not fathom. The evening's music was exquisite, featuring a young virtuoso from Vienna who played with both technical precision and emotional depth. Grace found herself transporting, momentarily forgetting her grief in the beauty of Beethoven's sonatas. During the intermission, Nicholas appeared beside her again. "You were moved by the performance," he observed. "Very much so. Herr Müller plays with remarkable sensitivity. I thought you might appreciate his interpretation. He finds emotion in the music that others miss." Nicholas hesitated, then added, "You remind me of him in that way. You feel things deeply, beneath your composed exterior." Grace stared at him, startled by his insight. "You cannot possibly know that, Your Grace." "Can I not?" His voice was soft, meant for her ears alone. "I see how you watch others, how you listen. You observe the world as if standing slightly apart from it." "As do you," she countered, suddenly understanding. "That is why you notice." A smile touched his lips. Perhaps we recognize something of ourselves in each other. The moment stretched between them, fragile and significant, until the pianist returned to resume his performance. For the remainder of the evening, Grace was acutely aware of Nicholas's presence in the room, even when he was conversing with others. Occasionally, their eyes would meet across the salon, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement, perhaps, of mutual understanding. As they prepared to depart, the Duke personally escorted them to their carriage. "I hope you will join me for a drive in the park tomorrow afternoon," he said to Grace. "The weather promises to be fine." Before she could formulate a polite refusal, Lady Windermere intervened. "What a lovely invitation. Grace would be delighted, wouldn't you, my dear?" Trapped by propriety, Grace nodded. "Thank you, Your Grace." As the carriage pulled away, Grace turned to her aunt. "You should not have accepted on my behalf." "Nonsense. A drive in the park is perfectly proper, especially with a gentleman of the Duke's standing." Lady Windermere studied her niece's face in the dim carriage light. "He interests you, does he not?" "He is not what I expected in a duke," Grace admitted. "Nicholas has always been exceptional. His father recognized it early, said the boy had an old soul." Lady Windermere smiled gently. "Perhaps that is why he seems to understand your grief so well." "Understanding grief is not the same as healing it, Aunt." "No, but it is a beginning." Grace turned to look out the window, unwilling to acknowledge the small spark of warmth that had kindled in her chest. It felt like betrayal, to Edward, to the love they had shared, to the promises she had made in the depths of her grief. Yet she could not deny that something about Nicholas Kincaid had reached past her carefully constructed defenses, touching a place she had thought forever closed. The next day dawned clear and mild, a perfect spring afternoon for a drive in Hyde Park. Grace chose a walking dress of dove grey with subtle lavender trim, a concession to emerging from deep mourning that she had not anticipated making so soon. The Duke arrived precisely at the appointed hour, driving a handsome curricle with a matched pair of gleaming bays. He handled the reins with casual expertise as they made their way toward the park. "You drive very well, Your Grace," Grace observed. "Nicholas," he reminded her gently, "and thank you, these two are particular favorites of mine. I bred them myself at Harrington Park. You take an interest in horse breeding. Among other agricultural pursuits, I believe a landlord should understand every aspect of his estates." He glanced at her. "You seem surprised. I had not expected a duke to concern himself with such practical matters. Ah, you thought I would be an idle aristocrat, concerned only with London pleasures and ignoring my responsibilities." His tone was light, but Grace sensed a genuine question beneath. "Forgive me, I should not make assumptions." "No apology necessary. Many of my peers do fit that description." He guided the horses expertly around a slower carriage. "I was raised differently. My father believed that privilege carries obligation, to the land, to the people who depend on us, to the future. A noble philosophy. One I suspect you share," Nicholas said. "Your aunt tells me you often assisted the poor in your village, teaching the children and visiting the sick." Grace was surprised at his knowledge. It was nothing extraordinary. Simply what any Christian should do. Yet not what many choose to do. His eyes held hers for a moment before returning to the road. "Your compassion speaks well of you, Grace." They had reached the fashionable driving hour, when society paraded through the park in their finest equipages. Grace noticed the interested glances, the whispers behind gloved hands, as people recognized the Duke, with an unfamiliar lady at his side. "We are attracting attention," she murmured. "Does that trouble you? It may lead to expectations I cannot fulfill." Nicholas slowed the horses, guiding them toward a less crowded path. "You refer to the inevitable speculation about my intentions." "Yes," Grace admitted. "Your interest, however innocent, will be misconstrued by society." "And if it is not misconstrued," he asked quietly, "if my interest is precisely what they suspect?" Grace's heart stuttered. "Your Grace, Nicholas, I have been honest about my situation. I am not seeking marriage." "Because your heart belongs to another," he said, completing her thought. "I remember. Then why pursue this acquaintance when it can lead nowhere?" Nicholas drew the curricle to a halt beneath a spreading oak tree, away from prying eyes. He turned to face her fully. "Because I believe in possibilities, Grace. In healing, in second chances." His gaze was steady, unwavering. "I do not ask you to forget your love. I would never be so presumptuous. But I ask only for the chance to know you, and perhaps in time for you to know me." Grace looked away, her throat tight with emotion. "You deserve someone who can give you her whole heart. And you deserve someone who respects your past while offering a future." He touched her gloved hand lightly. "I am a patient man, Grace. I ask only that you do not close your mind to possibilities." Before she could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Nicholas straightened and took up the reins again as two riders came into view. "Harrington. Thought that was your curricle." The speaker was a fashionably dressed young man with a languid air. His companion, equally fashionable but with sharper eyes, assessed Grace with unconcealed curiosity. "Lord Pembroke, Lord Easton." Nicholas acknowledged them with a nod. "May I present Miss Grace Montgomery, Lady Windermere's niece?" Both men bowed from their saddles. "Charmed, Miss Montgomery," Lord Pembroke said. "You're new to London, I believe." "Yes, my lord. I arrived a few weeks ago." "And already captured the attention of London's most elusive bachelor," Lord Easton remarked with a sly smile. "Quite an achievement." Grace felt her cheeks warm. His Grace has been kind enough to show me the park, nothing more. Of course, Lord Pembroke drawled, exchanging a knowing look with his companion. Well, we shan't keep you from your tour. Good day, Harrington, Miss Montgomery. As they rode off, Grace could hear their barely suppressed laughter. Mortification washed over her. Pay them no mind, Nicholas said, setting the horses in motion again. Easton and Pembroke live for gossip. By tomorrow, they'll have found some new subject for their amusement. But the damage is done, Grace said quietly. They will tell others they found us alone, away from the main paths. We were hardly doing anything improper. Besides, you are with the Duke of Harrington. Your reputation is quite safe in my company. Is it? Grace met his gaze directly. Your reputation as a confirmed bachelor only adds fuel to their speculation. They will wonder what makes me different, why you have singled me out. Nicholas's expression grew serious. Would it be so terrible to be singled out by me? The question hung in the air between them. Grace looked away, unable to answer truthfully, for the truth was more complicated than she wished to admit, even to herself. I think it would be best if you return me to my aunt's house now, she said finally. Nicholas studied her face for a long moment before nodding. As you wish. The ride back passed in silence, the easy companionship of earlier replaced by a tension Grace could not dispel. As they approached Lady Windermere's townhouse, Nicholas finally spoke again. I've upset you. That was not my intention. No, it is I who have been unfair, Grace admitted. You have been nothing but kind and honorable. It is my own confusion that troubles me. He brought the curricle to a halt before her aunt's door. Confusion suggests possibilities, Grace. I count that as progress. Despite herself, a small smile touched her lips. You are incorrigibly optimistic, Your Grace. Nicholas, he corrected, returning her smile. And yes, when it matters, I am indeed. He handed her down from the curricle with exquisite care, his touch lingering a moment longer than necessary. Until Lady Kensington's dinner, then. Until then, Grace echoed, suddenly reluctant to part. As she watched his curricle disappear down the street, Grace pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the steady beat of her heart. A heart she had believed permanently given to Edward, yet which now beat with a confusing mix of guilt and anticipation. Impossible, she whispered to herself, utterly impossible. But as she entered the house, she could not help but wonder if Nicholas Kincaid might prove her wrong. The week leading to Lady Kensington's dinner passed in a blur of social calls and fittings for new gowns. Lady Windermere, sensing her niece's shifting mood, had insisted Grace needed more appropriate attire for her gradual emergence from mourning. The lavender silk will be perfect for tomorrow's dinner, her aunt declared as the modiste made final adjustments. Subdued enough to respect your loss, yet with enough color to suggest you are rejoining society. Grace stood patiently as pins were placed and removed. I fear people will misinterpret my intentions, Aunt. And what are your intentions, my dear? Lady Windermere asked shrewdly. You've spoken less of governess positions these past days. Grace flushed. I am merely considering all options, including the one 6 feet tall with remarkable grey-blue eyes. Aunt, please. The Duke is a friend, nothing more. A friend who sends flowers every other day and happens to appear wherever we go. Lady Windermere smiled kindly. My dear girl, Nicholas Kincaid is in pursuit, and everyone in London knows it. He is wasting his time, Grace insisted, though with less conviction than before. Is he? I've noticed you no longer wear Edward's pendant. Grace's hand went automatically to her throat, where the pearl pendant had hung for months. She had removed it 3 days ago, telling herself it was because it did not match her new gown. The truth was more complicated. I will always love Edward, she said softly. Of course you will. First loves remain with us always. Lady Windermere approached, taking Grace's hands in hers. But our hearts have remarkable capacity, my dear. They can hold past loves while making room for new ones. Grace looked away, unable to deny the truth in her aunt's words. Something was changing within her, slowly but undeniably. The crushing weight of grief had lightened, allowing her to breathe more freely, to see possibilities where before there had been only emptiness. I am afraid, she admitted in a whisper. Of loving again, or of betraying Edward's memory? Both, and of disappointing Nicholas. He deserves someone unburdened by the past. We are all shaped by our pasts, my dear. Nicholas understands this better than most. Lady Windermere squeezed her hands gently. Trust your heart, Grace. It will guide you truly if you let it. Grace wondered if that were true, or if her heart, so long closed in grief, could be trusted to recognize love if it appeared again in a different form. Lady Kensington's dinner proved to be a more intimate affair than Grace had expected, with only 12 guests seated at the elegant table. Grace found herself placed between Lord Pembroke and an elderly gentleman introduced as Sir William Hastings, a distinguished historian. Across from her sat Nicholas, with Lady Kensington herself on his right and a strikingly beautiful blonde on his left. Lady Sophia Blackwood, Lady Windermere whispered, following Grace's gaze. Her father is the Earl of Westerfield. They say she's had her cap set for Nicholas for years. Grace observed the ease with which Lady Sophia leaned toward Nicholas, her perfect features animated as she spoke. She was everything Grace was not: confident, aristocratic, untouched by tragedy, the perfect duchess. A sharp pang of something that felt uncomfortably like jealousy took Grace by surprise. She had no claim on Nicholas, nor did she want one. Yet watching Lady Sophia's perfectly manicured hand rest briefly on his arm awakened an emotion Grace had thought long buried. Miss Montgomery, I understand you are from Devonshire. Lord Pembroke's question drew her attention. Yes, my lord, a small village near Exeter. Charming country. Though one wonders what brings a country miss to London in the middle of the season. His tone was light, but his eyes held a calculating gleam. My aunt kindly invited me to stay with her, Grace replied evenly. How fortunate. And more fortunate still to have caught the Duke's eye so quickly. Lord Pembroke lowered his voice. Though I should warn you, many have tried to secure Harrington's interest before. He is notoriously selective. Grace met his gaze directly. I have no designs on the Duke, my lord. Our acquaintance is based on mutual respect, nothing more. Indeed, then you are unique among the unmarried ladies of London. He sipped his wine. One wonders what makes you so different. Perhaps the fact that I do not view his grace as a prize to be won, Grace replied coolly. Lord Pembroke laughed. Touché, Miss Montgomery. I begin to see why Harrington finds you refreshing. Across the table, Nicholas's eyes met hers briefly, a question in their depths. Grace managed a small smile before turning to engage Sir William in conversation about his historical studies. After dinner, the ladies withdrew to the drawing-room while the gentlemen remained with their port. Lady Sophia immediately claimed the seat beside Grace on a small settee. Miss Montgomery, I've been longing to speak with you. Her voice was musical, her smile dazzling. You've become quite the talk of the season. I cannot imagine why, Grace replied cautiously. No. The mysterious country miss who has captured the Duke's attention, it's positively romantic. Lady Sophia leaned closer, though I must admit to curiosity about your background. Were your parents in trade? The subtle barb was delivered with such a sweet smile that Grace almost missed it. Almost. My father was a gentleman, Lady Sophia, though of modest means. My mother was the daughter of a vicar. How respectable. And now you live with your aunt, Lady Windermere. Yes, since coming to London. Such a blessing to have connections, however distant. Lady Sophia's perfect eyebrows rose slightly. Though I understand you were previously attached to a merchant of some kind, before his unfortunate accident at sea. The casual cruelty of the question stole Grace's breath. Edward Parker was a shipping agent, she managed, her voice tight, and a finer man than many who claim noble birth. Of course, I meant no offense. Lady Sophia patted her hand condescendingly. It's simply that someone like the Duke, well, he has certain expectations to maintain. The Harrington title dates back to the conquest, you know. I am well aware of the Duke's lineage, Grace replied, struggling to maintain her composure. Though I fail to see its relevance to our conversation, as I have no designs on his Grace or any other gentleman. Lady Sophia's smile turned knowing. Perhaps not, but he certainly has designs on you, my dear. I merely thought to spare you potential disappointment. The Duke may flirt with unconventionality, but when it comes to marriage, duty will prevail. It always does for men of his station. Before Grace could respond, the drawing-room doors opened to admit the gentleman. Nicholas immediately scanned the room, his expression lightening when he located Grace. He made his way directly to the settee where she sat with Lady Sophia. "Ladies, I trust you've had a pleasant conversation," he asked, though his eyes remained on Grace, noting her slightly flushed cheeks and tense posture. "Delightful," Lady Sophia purred. "Miss Montgomery and I were just discussing family connections." "Indeed," Nicholas's gaze sharpened. "A fascinating topic, though perhaps not as interesting as Miss Montgomery's considerable talents. Did you know she speaks fluent French and Italian, and plays the pianoforte beautifully?" Grace stared at him in surprise. She had mentioned her modest musical abilities once, but never her facility with languages. "Your aunt is quite proud of your accomplishments," he explained, answering her unspoken question. "As well she should be." Lady Sophia rose gracefully. "How charming. Perhaps Miss Montgomery might favor us with a performance sometime. For now, I believe Lady Kensington is signaling for tea." As she glided away, Nicholas took her vacated seat. "She upset you," he observed quietly. "Not at all," Grace lied. Grace, just her name, spoken softly, but with such understanding that her composure threatened to crack. "She merely reminded me of certain realities." "Such as?" Grace hesitated, then met his gaze directly. "That dukes marry suitable women from their own circle, not penniless gentlemen's daughters with connections to trade." Nicholas's expression darkened. "Is that what she implied?" "She was not wrong, Your Grace." "Nicholas," he corrected automatically. "And she was entirely wrong, in both her assumptions and her right to voice them." "Was she? Can you honestly say that my background would not be an impediment to?" Grace stopped, realizing she was speaking as if there were some understanding between them. "To what, Grace?" he prompted gently. "To any deeper connection," she finished, her voice barely audible. Nicholas leaned closer, his voice equally low. "The only impediment I see is your belief that your heart is not free to give." Grace stared at him, a peculiar warmth spreading through her chest. "You cannot mean—" "I mean precisely what you think I mean." His gaze held hers, unwavering and sincere. "But this is neither the time nor place for such a conversation. Will you walk with me in your aunt's garden tomorrow morning? Say at 11. Grace knew she should refuse. To agree would be to acknowledge the possibility of something she had thought forever beyond her reach. Yet she found herself nodding. "Yes," she said simply. The smile that transformed his face made her heart turn over in her chest. "Until tomorrow, then." As he moved away to speak with other guests, Grace remained on the settee, her thoughts in turmoil. What was she doing? Edward had been gone barely 6 months. How could she even contemplate feelings for another man? Yet Nicholas Kincaid had awakened something in her, a spark of life, of hope, of possibility that she had thought extinguished forever. Later that night, as Grace prepared for bed, her maid brought her a small package that had been delivered by messenger. "It came just before you returned from dinner, miss," Mary explained. "I would have given it to you earlier, but you seemed so tired when you came in." Grace opened the package to find a small, leather-bound volume of poetry. A note in a bold, masculine hand was tucked inside the cover. "For sleepless nights when memories press too close, these words have brought me comfort. Perhaps they may do the same for you. Until tomorrow. N.K." Opening the book, Grace found it was Tennyson's In Memoriam, the poet's extended meditation on grief and loss following the death of his dear friend. The pages were well worn, with certain passages marked by a light pencil stroke. She turned to one such marked section and read, "I hold it true, whate'er befall, I feel it when I sorrow most. 'Tis better to have loved and lost, than never to have loved at all." Tears filled her eyes as she traced the familiar words with her fingertip. Nicholas had known grief, had wrestled with loss, had found these same words a comfort in his darkest hours. It was the most intimate gift she could have received, not jewels or flowers or pretty trinkets, but a glimpse into his soul. Grace closed the book and held it to her chest, her heart full of a strange, bittersweet emotion she could not name. Tomorrow she would walk with Nicholas in the garden. Tomorrow she would hear what he wished to say. Tomorrow, perhaps, she would find the courage to admit that her carefully constructed defenses were crumbling and that the impossible had happened. Her heart was awakening once more. Morning brought clear skies and gentle sunshine, as if nature itself approved of the day's significance. Grace dressed with particular care, choosing a walking dress of pale blue that Lady Windermere had insisted brought out the color of her eyes. Her hair, usually drawn back severely, she allowed to be arranged in softer curls around her face. "You look lovely, my dear," her aunt said approvingly as Grace entered the breakfast room. "The Duke will be most appreciative." "Aunt, please. It is merely a walk in the garden." Lady Windermere smiled knowingly but said nothing more. After a light breakfast, which Grace barely touched due to the butterflies in her stomach, she retreated to the morning room with her embroidery, attempting to calm her nerves with the familiar rhythm of needle and thread. At precisely 11 o'clock, the butler announced the Duke of Harrington. Nicholas entered the morning room with a quiet confidence that immediately drew Grace's attention. He was dressed more casually than she had seen him before, in a well-cut riding coat of dark green and buff trousers. He looked less like a formal duke and more like a country gentleman, and Grace found she preferred him this way. "Good morning, Miss Montgomery," he said, his voice warm. "I trust you slept well." "Very well, thank you, Your Grace." Grace set aside her embroidery and rose. "Your gift was most thoughtful." "I hoped you might find it so." His eyes searched her face. "Tennyson understands grief in a way few poets do." "Yes, he does." Grace hesitated, then added softly, "as do you, it seems." A shadow crossed his face. "I have known my share of loss, but today is too fine for sad memories." "Shall we walk?" Lady Windermere's garden, while modest by aristocratic standards, was a lovely oasis in the heart of London, with carefully tended flower beds, gravel paths, and a small fountain at its centre. A wrought iron bench beneath a flowering cherry tree offered a secluded spot away from the house. They walked in companionable silence for a few moments, the gravel crunching softly beneath their feet. Grace was acutely aware of Nicholas beside her, his tall form radiating a steady strength she found increasingly comforting. "I must apologize for Lady Sophia's behavior last night," Nicholas said finally. "She was deliberately unkind." "There is no need to apologize. She merely expressed what many must think." Grace kept her eyes on the path ahead. "My background is not what one expects for a duke's acquaintance." "Friend," Nicholas corrected. "At the very least we are friends, are we not?" Grace glanced at him, a small smile touching her lips. "Yes, I believe we are." They had reached the bench beneath the cherry tree. Nicholas gestured toward it. "Shall we sit for a moment?" Grace nodded, arranging her skirts as she took her place on the bench. Nicholas remained standing, an uncharacteristic tension in his posture. "Grace," he began, then stopped, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I asked you here today because I can no longer maintain the pretense that my interest in you is merely friendly." Grace's heart began to race. "Nicholas." He held up a hand. "Please let me finish. I know your heart is wounded. I know you believe it belongs to Edward still. I would never ask you to forget him or the love you shared." Nicholas knelt before her, taking her hands in his. The gesture was so unexpected, so intimate, that Grace could only stare at him in wonder. "What I ask is much simpler, and perhaps much harder. I ask only that you consider the possibility of making room in your heart for new feelings." His thumbs traced gentle circles on the backs of her hands. "I have come to care for you deeply, Grace Montgomery. Your courage, your kindness, your quiet strength, they have touched me in ways I never expected." Grace's throat tightened with emotion. "Nicholas, I am not proposing marriage," he said quickly. "Not yet. That would be premature and unfair to you. What I am proposing is permission to court you properly, openly, with the understanding that my intentions are serious." He looked up at her, his grey-blue eyes filled with a vulnerability that caught at her heart. "I am proposing the chance to show you that love can bloom again, even in a heart that believes itself forever closed." Grace was silent, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his voice, the tenderness in his touch. How could she answer him? How could she explain the tumult of emotions his words had unleashed? "You deserve an answer," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I fear any answer I give would be unfair, to you, to Edward's memory, to myself." Nicholas continued to hold her hands, his gaze steady. "Tell me what you feel, Grace. Not what you think you should feel, or what others would expect you to feel, just the truth." The truth, such a simple request, yet so difficult to fulfill. Grace closed her eyes briefly, searching her heart for the honesty he deserved. "I feel confused," she admitted. "When Edward died, I thought my capacity for love died with him. I wrapped myself in grief like a shroud, believing it was the only way to honor what we had shared." She opened her eyes to find Nicholas watching her with complete attention, his expression open and accepting. "Then I met you," she continued, "and you were so different from what I expected, so kind, so understanding. You saw past my defenses in a way no one else has." Grace took a deep breath. "I find myself thinking of you when you're not present, looking forward to seeing you again, feeling alive in your company when for months I have merely existed." Hope kindled in Nicholas's eyes. "And does that frighten you?" "Yes," she admitted. "It feels like betrayal." "Of Edward. Of Edward, of my promises to myself, of who I thought I was." Nicholas nodded slowly. "May I tell you what I believe?" "Please." "I believe that love is not finite. It is not a resource that can be depleted or exhausted. Loving again does not diminish what you felt for Edward, it honors it." His voice grew softer. "Because he taught you how to love, Grace, and that is a gift beyond measure, one that should not be buried with him." Tears filled Grace's eyes at the simple truth of his words. "How can you be so wise?" A sad smile touched his lips. "I watched my mother after my father died. She never remarried, never allowed herself to love again, believing it would somehow tarnish what she and my father had shared. And I saw how that choice hollowed her out over the years, until she became a shadow of the vibrant woman she once was." He released one of Grace's hands to gently brush a tear from her cheek. "I would not wish that fate on anyone, least of all you." Grace leaned slightly into his touch, overwhelmed by the tenderness in his gesture. "What if I cannot give you what you deserve? What if my heart cannot fully heal?" "Then we will discover that together," Nicholas said simply. "I ask only for the chance, Grace, the chance to know you better, to let you know me, to see where this feeling between us might lead." In that moment, looking into his earnest face, Grace felt something shift within her, a loosening of the bands that had constricted her heart for so long. Not a complete release, not yet. But a beginning. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Nicholas, I would like that very much." Joy transformed his face, making him appear younger, more carefree than she had ever seen him. He raised her hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Thank you," he said, the words heartfelt and simple. As they continued their walk through the garden, Grace felt lighter than she had in months. The future remained uncertain, her heart still tender with old grief. But for the first time since receiving that fateful letter about Edward's ship, she found herself looking forward rather than back, wondering rather than regretting. It was, she thought, the beginning of a new chapter, one she had never expected to write, yet which now beckoned with unexpected promise. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of carefully chaperoned outings and social events. True to his word, Nicholas courted Grace openly but respectfully, his attentions obvious to all of London society, yet never improper. They attended concerts and gallery exhibitions, drove in the park, and danced at balls, Grace having finally agreed that light mourning permitted such activities. Society gossip, predictably, reached fever pitch. The mysterious Miss Montgomery, who had appeared from nowhere to capture the Duke of Harrington's heart, was the subject of endless speculation. Some whispered that she must possess a vast fortune hidden away somewhere. Others suggested more scandalous attractions. Lady Sophia Blackwood made no secret of her disdain, commenting loudly at one ball that some women will go to extraordinary lengths to improve their circumstances. Grace weathered the gossip with quiet dignity, neither confirming nor denying the rumors about her relationship with Nicholas. In truth, she herself was not entirely certain where they stood. Nicholas had been unfailingly attentive and kind, but had not pressed her for deeper commitments than she was ready to give. Their relationship remained in a curious limbo, more than friendship, less than an official understanding. "You realize, my dear, that Nicholas will have to declare himself eventually," Lady Windermere remarked one morning as they breakfasted together. "Society expects it, given his marked preference for your company." Grace set down her teacup. "His intentions have been clear from the beginning, Aunt. He wishes to court me properly, with a view to possible marriage." "Possible marriage?" Lady Windermere raised an eyebrow. "My dear girl, when a Duke of Nicholas's standing courts a lady as he has courted you, marriage is the only possible outcome, unless he is the worst kind of scoundrel, which we know he is not." "We have agreed to proceed slowly," Grace explained. "To give me time to be certain of your feelings for him, or of your readiness to love again." "Both, I suppose." Grace traced the rim of her teacup thoughtfully. "I care for Nicholas deeply. He is everything good and honorable. Any woman would be fortunate to be his duchess. But I still feel Edward's loss, less acutely than before, yet it remains." She looked up at her aunt. "Is it possible to love two men at once? One gone, one present." Lady Windermere's expression softened with understanding. "My dear, the heart is not so simple as to love only once, nor so cruel as to forget entirely. You will always love Edward, but that love will change over time, becoming a cherished memory rather than a living pain." She reached across the table to cover Grace's hand with her own. "Nicholas understands this better than most. It is one of the reasons he is so well suited to you." Before Grace could respond, the butler entered with the Morning Post on a silver tray. Among the usual invitations and correspondence was a letter addressed to Grace in an unfamiliar hand. "How curious," she murmured, breaking the seal. "It's from a Mr. James Parker, writing from Bristol." As she read the contents, the colour drained from her face. Lady Windermere watched in alarm as Grace's hands began to tremble. "My dear, what is it? You look as though you've seen a ghost." In a sense, Grace had. She looked up at her aunt, her eyes wide with shock. "It's Edward," she whispered. "He's alive." The letter fell from her nerveless fingers onto the breakfast table. Lady Windermere quickly retrieved it, scanning its contents with growing disbelief. Mr. Parker, Edward's older brother, wrote that Edward had indeed survived the shipwreck that had claimed most of his crew. Badly injured and suffering from memory loss, he had been rescued by Portuguese fishermen and taken to a small coastal village, where he had spent months recovering. Only recently had his memory returned sufficiently for him to identify himself and contact his family in England. He was currently recuperating in Bristol and had asked his brother to contact Grace with the miraculous news. "He wishes to see me," Grace said numbly. "He says he has never forgotten me, even when he could remember nothing else." Lady Windermere set the letter down carefully. "This is most unexpected." "What am I to do, Aunt?" Grace pressed her hands to her cheeks, feeling the heat of shock and confusion. "Edward is alive. After all this time, he is alive. And Nicholas?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Grace closed her eyes briefly, her mind spinning with conflicting emotions. "I must go to Bristol," she said finally. "I must see Edward, speak with him. I owe him that much. And Nicholas deserves to know why," Lady Windermere said gently. "Before you go, you must tell him." Grace nodded, her throat tight with unshed tears. "Yes, of course, he has been nothing but honest with me. I must do the same." "What will you tell him?" "The truth," Grace replied, though her heart quailed at the thought of the pain she would cause. "That Edward has returned and I must see him. That I don't know what this means for us." Lady Windermere studied her niece's pale face. "And do you know what you wish it to mean, Grace?" The question struck at the heart of Grace's confusion. 6 months ago, Edward's return would have seemed like a miracle beyond price, the answer to her most desperate prayers. Now, with Nicholas in her life, her feelings were far more complicated. "I don't know," she admitted. "I truly don't know." Nicholas received the news with outward calm, though Grace could see the shock and pain in his eyes as they sat together in Lady Windermere's drawing room. I understand that you must go to him, he said, his voice carefully controlled. It is only right. I never expected. We all believed him lost, Grace said, her own voice unsteady. To learn he has been alive all this time, suffering alone. Of course you must go to him, Nicholas repeated. He hesitated, then asked the question she had been dreading. Do you still love him, Grace? Grace met his gaze directly, knowing he deserved nothing less than complete honesty. I don't know what I feel, Nicholas. For months I mourned him, believing him dead. Then I met you and everything changed. Now he has returned and I am confused. Nicholas nodded slowly. I see. I care for you deeply, Grace said, reaching for his hand. These past weeks they have meant more to me than I can express. But Edward was your first love, the man you intended to marry before fate intervened. Nicholas's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand, a gesture that had become familiar and dear. How can I compete with such a bond? It is not a competition, Grace protested. Isn't it? A sad smile touched his lips. Two men love you, Grace. Only one can claim your heart. The simple truth of his words struck her with the force of revelation. For the first time, Grace acknowledged to herself that what she felt for Nicholas was indeed love, different from what she had shared with Edward, yet no less profound. I need time, she said softly. Time to understand my own heart. Nicholas lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Then time you shall have. Go to Bristol, speak with Edward. Discover what remains between you. He released her hand and rose to his feet. Know this, Grace Montgomery, I will respect whatever decision you make, but also know that I love you wholly and completely and will wait for you if there is any chance that you might choose me. Grace stood as well, tears filling her eyes at his declaration. Nicholas, He shook his head slightly. No more words now. They would only cloud what must be clear between us when next we meet. With a formal bow that broke her heart with its distance, Nicholas left her standing alone in the drawing room, the echo of his footsteps fading down the hallway like the last notes of a bittersweet melody. Bristol was a bustling port city, its harbour crowded with ships from around the world. Grace watched the activity from the window of her hotel, the sea breeze carrying the sense of salt, tar, and exotic cargo to her nostrils. Somewhere in this city, Edward waited for her, Edward, whom she had mourned, whose memory she had cherished, whose loss had shaped the woman she had become. Lady Windermere had insisted on accompanying her, a propriety for which Grace was profoundly grateful. She could not have faced this moment alone. Are you ready, my dear? Her aunt asked gently, adjusting her bonnet in the mirror. Grace smoothed her grey travelling dress, her heart pounding with nervous anticipation. As ready as I shall ever be, I suppose. They took a hired carriage to the modest lodging house where Edward was staying with his brother. Each turn of the wheels brought Grace closer to a moment she had once dreamed of, but now approached with conflicted emotions. The lodging house was clean and respectable, if plain. Mr. James Parker, a serious-looking man with Edward's fair hair but none of his animation, greeted them in the small sitting room. Miss Montgomery, Lady Windermere, thank you for coming. His manner was formal, slightly stiff. Edward has been most anxious to see you. How is his health? Grace asked, removing her gloves slowly, buying time before the inevitable reunion. Improved greatly, though he still tires easily. The physicians say he may never fully recover his former strength, but he is alive, which is miracle enough. Mr. Parker hesitated. I should warn you, he has changed somewhat. The ordeal has left its mark on him. Grace nodded, swallowing hard. I understand. I shall fetch him then. As Mr. Parker left the room, Grace exchanged a glance with her aunt, who squeezed her hand reassuringly. Courage, my dear. The door opened, and Grace turned slowly, her heart in her throat. Edward stood in the doorway, leaning heavily on a walking stick. He was thinner than she remembered, his once robust frame now lean to the point of gauntness. His fair hair had grown longer, brushing his collar, and a scar ran along his left temple, disappearing into his hairline. But his eyes, the warm brown eyes that had once looked at her with such love, were the same, now alight with wonder and relief. Grace, he breathed, the single word filled with emotion. Edward. Her voice caught on his name, a name she had not spoken aloud in months. He moved toward her slowly, his limp pronounced, and Grace found herself stepping forward to meet him halfway. They stood before each other, separated by an arm's length and the gulf of all that had passed since their last meeting. "You are more beautiful than I remembered," Edward said softly. "And I remembered you as the most beautiful woman in England." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "And you are alive, I still cannot believe it." Edward glanced at Lady Windermere, who had discreetly moved to the window, giving them a semblance of privacy. "Might we speak alone? There is so much I need to tell you." Grace hesitated, then nodded. "Aunt, would you mind terribly?" "Not at all, my dear. I shall wait in the parlour downstairs." Lady Windermere departed with a meaningful glance at her niece, closing the door softly behind her. Left alone, Grace and Edward regarded each other in silence for a long moment. "Please sit," Edward said finally, gesturing to a small settee. "My strength is not what it was." They sat side by side, not touching, an awkward distance between them that had never existed before. Grace studied his face, noting the new lines of suffering around his eyes and mouth, the pallor beneath his naturally fair complexion. "Your brother said you were injured in the shipwreck," she began. "Yes. I was trapped below deck when the ship began to break apart. A falling beam struck my head." His hand went unconsciously to the scar on his temple. "When I woke, I was in a fisherman's hut on the Portuguese coast, with no memory of who I was or how I had come to be there." "How terrible for you," Grace murmured. "The fisherman and his wife took me in, cared for me. I learned their language, helped with the fishing when I was strong enough. It was a simple life, but not an unhappy one." Edward's gaze grew distant. "Then one day, a ship from Bristol docked in the village. Seeing the name of the port on her hull triggered something in my memory. Images began to return, the shipping office, my family, and you, Grace." "Always you." He reached for her hand, his touch tentative. "Even when I could remember nothing else, I remembered your face, your voice. It was like a beacon, drawing me back to myself." Grace felt tears slipping down her cheeks. "I mourned you, Edward. We all did. The shipping company sent word that your ship was lost with all hands." "They found wreckage and bodies," Edward nodded. "With no survivors known, they assumed the worst. By the time I regained enough memory to contact my family, months had passed." His thumb brushed over her knuckles in a gesture so similar to Nicholas's that Grace felt her heart constrict. "But I have returned, Grace. I have come back to you." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with expectation. This was the moment Grace had once dreamed of, prayed for in the depths of her grief. Yet now, faced with Edward's miraculous return, she felt strangely adrift, torn between the past she had mourned and the future she had begun to envision with Nicholas. "So much has changed, Edward," she said softly. "I have changed." A shadow crossed his face. "Your brother told me you had gone to London, that your aunt had taken you into society. I feared. That is, I wondered if your heart might have turned elsewhere." Grace looked down at their joined hands, unable to meet his eyes. "When I believed you lost, I thought my heart died with you. I never imagined loving anyone else." "But," Edward prompted gently, "but time passed, the wound began to heal. And I met someone kind and honorable, who understood grief because he had known it himself." Edward's hand tightened briefly on hers before releasing it. "I see. I never expected this, Edward. Had I known you were alive, you would have waited," he finished for her. "I know, Grace. I do not blame you for finding comfort elsewhere. How could I? I wanted only your happiness." The simple generosity of his response moved her deeply. This was the Edward she remembered, selfless, understanding, his love for her untainted by jealousy or possession. "Tell me about him," Edward said after a moment. "This man who has captured your heart." Grace hesitated, then found herself describing Nicholas, his quiet strength, his unexpected kindness, the way he had respected her grief while offering the possibility of a future beyond it. As she spoke, she realized she was revealing her own feelings more clearly than she had acknowledged even to herself. Edward listened in silence, his expression growing more resigned with each word. When she finished, he smiled sadly. "He sounds like a good man, this Duke of yours." "He is," Grace admitted softly. "But so are you, Edward. You always were." And now you must choose between us. Edward's gaze was direct, honest. I won't pretend I don't hope you'll choose me, Grace. I have carried the thought of you through darkness and pain, but I will not hold you to promises made before fate intervened so cruelly in our lives. He reached out to touch her cheek gently. Whatever you decide, know that I will always love you and will always wish for your happiness, even if that happiness lies with another. Grace closed her eyes, leaning into his touch for a brief moment. The familiar warmth of his hand against her skin awakened memories of simpler times, of young love untested by separation and loss. I need time, she whispered, time to understand my own heart. Of course, Edward nodded, withdrawing his hand. I have waited this long. I can wait a little longer for your answer. As Grace left the lodging house with Lady Windermere, her mind was in turmoil. She had come to Bristol seeking clarity, only to find her heart more confused than ever. Edward was alive. The miracle she had once prayed for had come to pass. Yet Nicholas had claimed a place in her heart that could not be easily relinquished. What will you do? Lady Windermere asked as their carriage rattled over the cobblestones. Grace gazed out at the bustling port, where ships departed daily for destinations unknown. Like those vessels, she stood at a crossroads with two distinct paths stretching before her. I don't know, Aunt, she admitted. I truly don't know. The journey back to London gave Grace time to reflect on her extraordinary situation. Lady Windermere, with uncharacteristic restraint, refrained from offering advice, allowing her niece the space to sort through her conflicted emotions. Edward was exactly as she remembered him, kind, gentle, his love for her unchanged by their separation. Seeing him again had awakened memories of their time together, of the future they had planned before fate intervened. He represented her past, a love that had shaped her profoundly. Nicholas, by contrast, had come into her life when she believed herself incapable of loving again. His patient understanding, his respect for her grief, his willingness to wait, all spoke of a depth of character that matched her own changed nature. He represented possibility, a future she had only recently allowed herself to imagine. How could she choose between them? How could anyone be expected to make such an impossible decision? As their carriage approached London, Lady Windermere finally broke her silence. You know, my dear, when I was a young woman, I found myself in a situation not entirely unlike yours. Grace looked at her aunt in surprise. You did? Indeed, I was courted by two gentlemen, your Uncle William, whom I eventually married, and Lord Cavendish, who was everything dashing and romantic that a young girl could desire. I had no idea. Few do. It was a private matter, as such things should be. Lady Windermere adjusted her gloves. Lord Cavendish was my first love, impetuous, passionate, full of grand gestures and sweeping declarations. William was steadier, more measured in his approach. He offered not grand passion but a deep, abiding devotion. How did you choose between them? Lady Windermere smiled softly. I asked myself a simple question. With whom could I build a life? Not just share moments of excitement or passion, but truly build something lasting, something that would sustain me through all of life's joys and sorrows. She reached across to take Grace's hand. The heart can be swayed by many things, my dear, by memory, by passion, by gratitude, by novelty. But a life together requires more than feelings. It requires compatibility of character, of values, of vision for the future. Grace considered her aunt's words carefully. You're suggesting I should choose Nicholas. I am suggesting you should choose the man who complements the woman you have become, not merely the woman you once were. Lady Windermere squeezed her hand gently. Only you can know who that is. As they arrived at the townhouse, Grace was no closer to a decision. Both men deserved an answer, yet how could she give one when her own heart remained divided? A letter awaited her, delivered during her absence. Grace recognized Nicholas's bold handwriting instantly, her heart quickening as she broke the seal. Grace, I write not to pressure you, but to offer clarity in what must be a confusing time. Since your departure for Bristol, I have reflected deeply on our situation. I meant what I said. I will respect whatever decision you make. But I would be less than honest if I did not tell you that these days without you have been a darkness I had not anticipated. I find myself thinking of you constantly, Your smile, your quiet strength, the way you listen so intently when others speak. I miss our conversations, our walks, even our silences. I know that Edward's return complicates what has grown between us. I cannot imagine your shock and confusion upon learning he lives, nor would I presume to understand the history you share. What I do know is this: I love you, Grace Montgomery, not as a substitute for someone lost, but as the remarkable woman you are today. I love your compassion, your resilience, your capacity for growth even through grief. If you choose Edward, I will understand. First loves leave an indelible mark upon the heart. But if you find that your feelings for me are true, know that I stand ready to build a life with you, one filled with respect, companionship, and love that grows deeper with each passing day. Whatever you decide, know that knowing you has changed me for the better, and for that alone I shall always be grateful. Yours, Nicholas. Grace pressed the letter to her heart, tears filling her eyes. The simple eloquence of Nicholas's words touched her deeply, reflecting the man himself, honest, direct, his emotions expressed without artifice or manipulation. Yet Edward too deserved her consideration. His love had sustained him through unimaginable hardship. His return was nothing short of miraculous. Could she turn away from such devotion? Over the next several days, Grace withdrew from society, pleading fatigue from her journey. In truth, she needed solitude to contemplate the choice before her. She reread Nicholas's letter countless times, remembering their conversations, the quiet understanding that had grown between them. She also wrote to Edward, maintaining their connection while still deferring her decision. A week after her return from Bristol, as Grace sat in the garden with Tennyson's poems, Nicholas's gift, on her lap, Lady Windermere approached with a visitor's card. "Edward is here," her aunt said softly. "He has come to London." Grace's heart lurched. Here now? "Yes, he arrived this morning and is waiting in the drawing room." Lady Windermere studied her niece's face. "Shall I tell him you are indisposed?" "No," Grace said, rising from her seat. "No, I must see him." Edward stood by the drawing-room window, his posture straighter than it had been in Bristol, though he still leaned on his walking stick. He turned as Grace entered, his face lighting with pleasure at the sight of her. "Grace, thank you for seeing me. I know I should have written first." "It's quite all right," she said, gesturing for him to sit. "I'm surprised to see you in London. Your brother said travel was still difficult for you." "It is, but I had to come." Edward settled onto a chair, grimacing slightly as he adjusted his injured leg. "After your visit, I found I could not wait passively for your decision. I had to speak with you again." Grace sat opposite him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Edward, please let me finish." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "When I was lost at sea, clinging to a piece of wreckage, I thought of you. When I lay injured in that fisherman's hut, your face was the only clear memory I retained. When I finally remembered who I was, you were the first person I wanted to contact." He reached for her hands, his touch warm and familiar. "I have loved you since the moment we met, Grace. That love sustained me through the darkest days of my life." Grace felt tears stinging her eyes. "I know, Edward, and I loved you too, deeply, completely." "Loved," he repeated, catching her use of the past tense. "Past tense?" Grace met his gaze directly, knowing she owed him nothing less than complete honesty. "When I believed you dead, a part of me died too. I wrapped myself in grief, certain I would never love again." She gently withdrew her hands from his. "But time passed, and slowly I began to heal. And then I met Nicholas, the Duke of Harrington. He understood grief, respected mine without trying to diminish it, and gradually, unexpectedly, my heart opened to him." Edward's expression tightened with pain, but he nodded for her to continue. "I never expected to see you again, Edward. Had I known you were alive, things might have been different, but I cannot undo the path my heart has taken." "You love him," Edward said simply. It was not a question. "Yes," Grace admitted, the truth of it suddenly clear and undeniable. "I do love him, differently than I loved you, but no less deeply." Edward closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the blow. When he opened them again, his gaze was sad but resigned. "I suspected as much when you spoke of him in Bristol. I could hear it in your voice, see it in your eyes." I'm so sorry, Edward. I never meant to cause you pain. I know that. He managed a small, brave smile. Grace, all I have ever wanted is your happiness. If this Duke is the man who makes you happy now, how could I stand in your way? His generosity humbled her. You are a good man, Edward Parker, one of the best I have ever known. Not good enough to begrudge you a future, because I cannot be part of it. Edward reached out to touch her cheek gently. The girl I fell in love with has become a remarkable woman. I am proud to have known you, to have been loved by you, even if that chapter of our lives is now closing. Grace caught his hand, pressing it briefly against her cheek. You will always hold a place in my heart, Edward, always. As you will in mine. He withdrew his hand slowly. I wish you every happiness, Grace Montgomery, you deserve nothing less. As Edward took his leave, Grace felt a curious mixture of sadness and relief. The weight of indecision had lifted, leaving clarity in its wake. She knew now what her heart had been trying to tell her, that while Edward would always represent an important part of her past, Nicholas was her future. That evening, she wrote a brief note to Nicholas, asking him to call on her the following afternoon. The simplicity of the request belied the significance of what she intended to say. Nicholas arrived precisely at the appointed hour, his formal attire and careful expression suggesting he had prepared himself for any outcome. Grace received him in the drawing room, having dismissed her aunt's offer to chaperone. Thank you for coming, she said as he entered. Your note left me little choice, Nicholas replied with a small smile that did not quite reach his eyes. I have thought of little else since receiving it. Grace gestured toward the settee. Please sit with me. There is much I need to say. Nicholas complied, maintaining a proper distance between them. His hands rested on his knees, the knuckles white with tension. I saw Edward yesterday, Grace began. He came to London unexpectedly. I see. Nicholas's expression remained carefully neutral. And how did you find him? Improved in health, still the kind, generous man I remembered. Grace took a deep breath. He released me, Nicholas. Without my having to ask, he understood that my heart has changed. A flicker of hope appeared in Nicholas's eyes, quickly suppressed. Changed how? Grace moved closer on the settee, close enough to take one of his hands in hers. I loved Edward once with all the fervor of young love. His loss nearly destroyed me. For months, I believed my heart incapable of feeling again. She squeezed his hand gently. Then I met you. You who understood grief without being defined by it. You who saw me as I am, not as I once was. You who offered patience when I needed time, strength when I faltered, and always, always respect for the journey my heart must take. Nicholas's hand turned in hers, their fingers intertwining. Grace, I love you, Nicholas Kincaid, she said softly, the words falling from her lips like a benediction. Not as a replacement for what I lost, but as something new and precious. Something I never expected to find, yet which now seems as essential to me as breathing. Joy transformed Nicholas's face, erasing the tension that had marked it since her return from Bristol. Do you mean it, truly? With all my heart, Grace assured him. My decision was never really about choosing between you and Edward. It was about acknowledging who I am now and what I want for my future. Nicholas raised her hand to his lips, pressing a fervent kiss to her knuckles. And what do you want, Grace Montgomery? She met his gaze directly, all doubt and hesitation finally gone. You, Nicholas, a life with you, a future built on understanding, respect, and love that grows deeper with each passing day. He recognized his own words from his letter, his eyes softening with emotion. I hardly dare believe this is real. It is very real, Grace assured him, as real as the heart that now beats only for you. Nicholas's free hand rose to cup her cheek, his touch infinitely tender. May I kiss you, Grace? I have wanted to for so long. In answer, Grace leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Their lips met in a kiss of exquisite sweetness, a promise of all that lay ahead. When they parted, Nicholas rested his forehead against hers, his breath mingling with her own. I love you, he whispered, more than words can express. Then don't use words, Grace replied softly. Show me every day, for the rest of our lives. Nicholas smiled, his eyes alight with joy and promise. Beginning now. He rose from the settee, still holding her hand, and to Grace's surprise, knelt before her on one knee. I had planned a more elaborate proposal, he admitted. A romantic setting, carefully chosen words, but I find I cannot wait another moment to ask you to be my wife. From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a ring of breathtaking beauty, a large sapphire surrounded by diamonds, set in platinum. This was my grandmother's, Nicholas explained. She was known for her courage, her compassion, and her ability to see the best in others, qualities you share, my love. He looked up at Grace, his expression solemn yet radiant with happiness. Grace Montgomery, you have taught me that love can bloom even in the most unlikely circumstances, that the heart's capacity for feeling is boundless if we only have the courage to open it. Would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife, my partner, my Duchess? Tears of joy spilled down Grace's cheeks as she nodded, too overcome to speak for a moment. Yes, she finally managed. Yes, Nicholas, with all my heart. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Grace felt the last shadows of grief recede, replaced by the warm light of a love that promised to sustain her through all the days to come. Edward would always hold a place in her heart, a cherished memory of first love and youthful dreams. But Nicholas, steady, patient, profound in his understanding, was her future, her second chance at happiness. And as his lips met hers once more, sealing their engagement with a kiss of tender passion, Grace knew with absolute certainty that her heart, once thought forever lost, had found its true home at last. 3 months later, Grace Montgomery became the Duchess of Harrington in a ceremony at St. George's, Hanover Square. Society whispered, of course, about her modest background, her previous attachment, the swift courtship. But as the bride and groom emerged from the church, the radiance of their mutual love silenced even the most determined gossips. Edward sent a gift, a finely bound volume of poetry with an inscription wishing them every happiness. He had returned to Bristol, where his brother had offered him a position in the family shipping business. In time, he too would find love again, with a widow whose quiet strength reminded him, in some ways, of Grace. As for the Duke and his new Duchess, they soon departed London for Harrington Park, where Nicholas's progressive management had created one of the most prosperous estates in England. There, away from society's prying eyes, they built a life together founded on mutual respect, shared purpose, and a love that grew deeper with each passing day. "Are you happy, my love?" Nicholas asked his wife one evening as they walked through the gardens at sunset, her hand tucked securely in the crook of his arm. Grace looked up at him, her heart full to overflowing. "Completely, are you?" "More than I ever believed possible." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "You have given me a gift beyond price, Grace, not just your love, but the knowledge that even the most wounded heart can heal, given time and tenderness." "We healed each other," Grace replied softly, "and in doing so, found something neither of us expected." As the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, the Duke and Duchess of Harrington continued their walk, their steps perfectly matched, their hearts beating as one. Behind them lay paths of grief and separation. Before them stretched a future bright with promise, a love story still unfolding, page by precious page.